All right. Hey, friends, and welcome to another episode where we're going to continue our series on recovery. So, if you've been with us, we've covered a lot thus far. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Matt Cotty, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker and the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And in this series, we're talking about recovery. Specifically, we're kind of talking about recovery from OCD, anxiety, and stress-related conditions, depression, panic, social anxiety, phobias, things like that. So we've talked about the idea of paralleling the mental health and physical health recovery journeys. And we've talked about understanding it as a practice, a daily choice, and this analogy in the last episode of driving through a storm. So if you haven't seen those or gone through those, please go back through that because it's all going to kind of build to this. So in this episode, I want to talk about the idea of recovery being a complete paradox. And before we dive into that, if you could help us out by liking and subscribing, commenting, and leaving a review on iTunes, it would really help the algorithm of the show and just help us get more exposure and get this into more people's hands. So we'd really appreciate your support with doing that. And also, if you're looking for help, please head over to restoredminds.com or check out the notes in the show where we have some additional resources to support you. So let's go in and talk about how recovery is a paradox. And it might be one of the grandest paradoxes of all time. So, like I've talked about on this series here, mental health is really a culmination of practices that we engage in. I do talk about there are some instances in which case a very traumatic event happens and the person has residual effects from that. But for the most part, someone who's wrestling with mental health, has oftentimes been engaging in practices for a long time, whether they know it or not, that develop poor mental health. So like for me, I, for most of my childhood, can remember ruminating, just being kind of lost in my mind, thinking about stuff. Well, that rumination is a huge compulsion, right? And I can remember many different decisions and things like that were based out of fear, you know, and how I handled fear and avoided and, got reassurance and checked and all these other things that I used to do. So when we understand mental health as a practice, what happens is when we don't understand it as a practice and we think of it as this kind of metaphorical thing that just kind of fell into our lap one day. What happens is that the symptoms that we don't like begin to be our definition of recovery. So, for instance, we might be experiencing these kind of intrusive thoughts that are flying in our mind, or we might be experiencing, high levels of anxiety, feelings of panic, right? This kind of stuff that's just kind of flooding into our experience. It can be very invasive, very intrusive, very, very tough to deal with. Yes. But then we go and instead of looking at maybe patterns that we've been engaging in that have led to that experience, led to these high periods of stress, how we've handled anxiety and uncomfortable emotions to that point in our life, we take those and we make the recovery about getting rid of those. So we say, oh, recovery is when I have no intrusive thoughts. Recovery is when I have no anxiety. And the paradox of that is that if you think that that's what recovery is, then what's going to happen is your life is going to be about trying not to have those experiences. Therefore, what you're going to do is you're going to be checking and analyzing, if you're experiencing those things, which is a compulsion, which keeps you stuck. Because these things are not in your control. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying here, because it's so important that we understand that. And I'm going to try to paraphrase it again just to really emphasize the point. If you make your recovery about not having thoughts and not having feelings that you don't like, it's going to keep you stuck. That's the paradox. And so you're like, well, Matt, that's not exactly great news because that's exactly what I want. I know. Believe me, I get it. I've been there. So then the question is, well, what is recovery and how do we, kind of flip this paradox upside down? And here's the whole paradox of the whole thing. When you stop trying not to have anxiety, and when you stop trying not to have intrusive thoughts, and you actually learn to accept them, learn to embrace them, learn to feel the feelings you don't like, learn to sit and allow thoughts, any thoughts, to pop in and out of your conscious awareness, what will happen is over time your brain will stop producing them, because it is your attention and your fear that perpetuates these cycles. Or I should say, your attention, your fear, and your behaviors that perpetuate these cycles. So what do I mean is, like, when you have a fearful reaction to anxiety, these feelings in your body or these thoughts in your mind, and then more importantly, you put all this attention on it and you try to get rid of it by doing these behaviors, that is sending a message to your brain that this is really dangerous. And paradoxically, what it's going to do is keep producing it because it thinks it's helping you. It thinks it's keeping you safe. Where if you actually can be inviting and welcoming to these feelings, and inviting and welcoming to the thoughts, and I know that sounds really scary right now, but that's why, having tools on how to do that, like we teach at Restored Minds, is so important, right? It's not as easy as just doing that. There's proper ways and proper tools to help you with that. But the paradox of recovery is, the harder and harder you try to recover, the worse and worse, or the further and further away you get from it. And when you actually give up the idea of trying to have no thoughts and have no feelings, that's when things have this propensity to calm down. And then all of a sudden, you start experiencing less anxiety, you start experiencing less intrusive thoughts. So when someone's like, hey Matt, how do you recover? The problem is that they're usually asking that question from the framework of, I don't want these thoughts and feelings, so I need you to tell me the tools I need to do to achieve that result. And that's why that's never the focus of recovery. The focus of recovery is, we want to make sure we eliminate all the behaviors we do that reinforce anything and break the loops. Now, by breaking the loops, there's a secondary effect of that, of the calming down of anxiety and calming down of intrusive thoughts. But if you make that your primary objective, you're going to use the tools and then always scan to check if thoughts and feelings are there, which is the paradox that's going to keep you stuck. It's so important that you understand this, because this took me a very, very long time to understand. And so I was always going and doing things, right? That's the thing. I was always putting all this effort into recovery. Oh God, okay, I'm gonna do so much ERP, or I'm gonna do ACT so well. I'm gonna really focus on. I'm gonna meditate. I'm gonna be mindful. I'm gonna use these tools to get the result I want. No, that is what kept me stuck. What I've learned is that recovery, really, it's not a lot you need to do, right? It's actually all about not doing. It's about not engaging in the behaviors. It's about, and yes, there's effort involved, and yes, there is work that you have to do, but it's a less is more approach. When you really work at this from a solution focused approach, like with the AAA response, for instance, and not so focused on thinking that if you do this exposure and you do this hierarchy, then you're going to get the result you want. That's a paradoxical way of keeping yourself stuck. And I think this idea keeps a lot of people stuck. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Really understanding recovery is a paradox, and really understanding that, what we're really doing with exposure and response prevention and these tools of acceptance commitment therapy and using the AAA response is, we're actually not engaging in the compulsions. That's really what the tools are designed to do: remove compulsions. And by doing that, you're actually showing your brain that you're already safe, because you don't have to do anything. So your brain's like, oh, well, maybe we're not really in danger, and then it stops producing these things. And so yes, recovery, by using the tools, you get your result as a secondary result. And that's the trippy part of it, that I just want to try to be transparent about it and be honest about it. And so hopefully that helps. And, if you're struggling, please, we have resources right down in the notes below, a little guide that can help you. We also have, different resources over at restoredminds.com where you can, again, check out our group programs, our live Zooms, our training programs, our individual coaching, like all that stuff. Just it's kind of meant to be different programs based on the level of support that you need. So please check that out if you're struggling, because this is not something that that I believe you should do alone, or a road that you should go on alone. So hope that helps. And again, check out those resources. And if you have any ideas for future episodes or things that you would like me to talk about or ideas, please share them in the notes or the discussion below. And with that said, in the last part of this series, again, I'm just going to talk about the importance of not doing this process alone, and really utilizing support on this process, because I just think it's one of those things that is not talked about enough. And so in the last part of this series, that's what I'm going to talk about. So look forward to seeing you guys there. And again, I hope you guys have a great day. See you soon. Thank you so much for watching that video. And so if you're struggling with OCD and anxiety, I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training for you over at Restored Minds, where you can start learning how to use our AAA response to really break out of that loop and ultimately take back control of your life. And all you need to do to access is just click the little link below, and you'll be taken to a page where you can register today. Thank you so much.